USA. If tomorrow all the things were done that were for all my life, and I had to start again with just my children and my wife, I thank my lucky stars to be living here today, 'cause the flag still stands for freedom and they can't take that away. And I'm proud to be an American, where at least I know I'm free. And I won't forget the men who died, who gave that right to me. And I'll gladly stand up next to you and defend her still today. 'Cause there ain't no doubt I love this land. God bless the USA. From the lakes of Minnesota to the hills of Tennessee, across the plains of Texas, from sea to shining sea, from Detroit down to Houston, from New York to LA. And there's pride in every American heart, and it's time we stand and say that I'm proud to be an American, where at least I know I'm free. And I won't forget the men who died, who gave that right to me. And I'll gladly stand up next to you and defend her still today. 'Cause there ain't no doubt I love this land. God bless the USA. God bless the USA.
No visiting Rotarians. We do have some guests. David?
This is a friend from Holly Morris. She just retired from the medical service, and of course, you know my wife Sheila.
Hi. Welcome. Happy Bucks. Happy Bucks is going to the Navy Junior ROTC. This is the last month. Big deep. Let's give him some money.
All righty. Got a happy band here.
I'm happy because tomorrow night right here is one of my favorite events I look forward to every year. It is the Business After Hours. It is partnered with the Greenville Chamber of Commerce, the Post Office Foundation, and Noon Rotary. It's right here from 5 to 7 p.m. Please join us. If you're in this room, if you want to bring your friends, please do. We'd love to see you here from 5 to 7. Thank you.
All right, Lonnie. All right, David. Uh-oh.
I'm just happy to be able to celebrate this day with all the veterans that I know, and two, especially for my uncle and my dad, both USMC.
I'm happy it's the Marine Corps' birthday and not mine.
And they're older than you are.
Are you sure?
I'm happy to be back today. Been missing a few meetings due to work, but anyway, I want to thank all of y'all that participated in our blood drive last Friday. We had the bigger bus, didn't have to turn anybody away. The maximum units would have been 36. We collected 32, and their goal was 23. So they said if we collected 23, that'd be great. So it was really good, and thank y'all for participating. We're going to do another one in January, so appreciate it.
Thank you. Anyone else happy? Okay, David.
Hey, I'm delighted to see these coats stacking up here, and there's a big packet of socks. There's more coats in that cardboard box underneath. Now, next week is our last time that we're going to be able to collect them. So I'll send out another group email reminder, coats, sweatshirts, socks, or cash. I happen to know we're going to get a significant amount of cash from a person in this room. So, and I talked to the pastor, Larry Allgood, with Abba's House, and he is beyond ecstatic knowing what we're doing, because he said there's a great need for the homeless population, especially with the cold weather coming on. So thank you very much.
Thank you, David. All right. Bob, here we go, buddy.
Thank you. Yeah. 2 or 3 things. One, David put out a request for baskets. This is pot, but that's close. Anyway, so anybody that can put something together for tomorrow night, we would absolutely appreciate that. I know she would. I want to point out is that leopards? Leopard table over here. We were just looking at that. I like that. That's good. My wife has a little pork pie hat and a pair of gloves that match those clothes. Pork pie hat is, yeah, okay, well, anyway. I know. Our vendor that serves us dinner, our lunch here every week, as most of you know, lost their facility at the farmers market down here. Thank you, Troy. They're taking pie orders for next week after next, Thanksgiving, whatever. So anyone that needs pies ahead of time, how about seeing Beth? Sir? Let's help these folks out a little bit, keep them busy. They're just like all of us that are in business. It's a difficult time to find employees, and these guys are up here feeding us when they could be at the store making pies. So support these guys. Thank you.
Are those out list, will we be able to get a list of that, Mark? Will we be able to get a list of that, of the pies available?
There are many copies here.
Okay, great. Do we have any more happy people in the house? Don't let me miss anyone. Hi, Roxanne. Haven't saw you in 12 years.
Okay, so I just wanted to thank everybody for your prayers. My dad had a heart attack. He had 5 bypasses when they got in there, and he's at home recovering well.
Yeah, all right, very good. Oh, praise the Lord. All righty, here we go, buddy. All right, just happy people. Anybody else? David Simmons?
There's a 10. That would be for basically $2 for each month that I've been the presidency, so that means y'all only have to put up with me for 7 more months. Just to let y'all know. It's happy to know that I'm nearly halfway through. Okay. Other than that, we can move on. Deck Destiny.
All right, here we go. Miss Holly, is it? Yes. Will you pick me a number? Pick me up. All right, thank you so much, ma'am. And the lucky number is 823 3 7 4 374. We got a winner? Oh, I'm a winner. I'm surprised it's not. All right, girlfriend. Let's see.
Oh.
All if we split. He said about that. 5 apart. All right.
Okay, we will be, here's some announcements. Business After Hours is tomorrow, and as Lonnie said, it is co-hosted by our club, the Greenville Rotary Post Office Foundation, and the Chamber of Commerce. If you would mind to stick around afterwards, we would like to do some moving of tables. If you would like to help, we will be decorating in the morning here at around 10 a.m.
We still have morning Rotary.
Well, no, we'll leave them tables. I just like the look of it. I mean, I don't have like 7 or 8, so anyway. So we will be decorating at 10 in the morning. Immediately after the meeting, we are going to do a congratulatory video for the Rotary Club of Commerce to congratulate them on their 100th anniversary. They want to present that at their anniversary party or banquet night, and they just want to share that with the district and other people. So stick around. Kami, we're gonna probably do two. We're gonna do one on film, and then we're gonna try one with the iPhone to see which one's the easiest to download, because we don't want this going public until they get to put it out there. So, the Christmas party, I was approached. So if you want things to change, the only way you can change them is to bring it to someone's attention. And Miss Karen brought it to my attention that Altrusa changed their Christmas parties to a Tuesday from a Thursday, so the Altrusas in the room could join us at our Christmas party. An executive decision was made by me and the Rotary Post Office Calendar event lady, Gloria, and the party will be Friday, December the 10th. I believe that is a Friday. December the 10th. Can't please all the people all the time, but Altrusa made it a point to change theirs last year, and here we moved ours because of road less travel. And everything changes through the holidays. Could I ask all the veterans in the room to please stand? A huge shout out to all these wonderful men that have served our country. And a happy Veterans Day to y'all. Along with them were any descendants that their dad or granddad or mom, grandma, or mother was in a military service. Would you all please stand? I'm standing. Look at all the service families we have in our room. So thankful. Y'all may be seated. Okay, hope to see y'all here tomorrow night, 5 to 7, business after hours. Rotarian of the Month did not make it. And next is Vocation Chair Trina. We'll have a few speakers come up.
Well, it is my honor today. We're going right on in with the Veterans Day thing, and it is my honor to introduce 3 of our club veterans, and that is going to be, hang on, James Adams, Byron Chitwood, and Don McBride. They're going to come up and speak for a moment about their time in our armed services. Thank you, gentlemen. Come on up. Debbie, do we have a microphone? Yeah. Oh, thank you. There we go. Miss Destiny.
Hand it back. I can use this.
Yes, if you want to go up there, that's fine. If you want to come here, you can.
Somebody would have to help me down.
Well, we can help you down if you want to do that. Come on up, Don.
Well, I was going to use the
Is it on?
I think so.
Is it on?
Yes.
Well, in thinking about this after Trina asked us, I'd have to say it's been 73 years since I was separated from the U.S. Navy. And, a lot of things have changed, and a lot of things I have forgotten. So this afternoon, I'd like to talk about why I joined the service. During my youth, we were in the middle of World War II, and if you were single and healthy, sooner or later you had to serve. It was just expected. And in my case, I think I joined the service because maybe it was a sense of duty, or merely the fault of my older brother and sister. I was the youngest of 3 siblings, born during the Depression. Sister Marjorie finished college in 1941 with a BA in English, taught 2 years in a high school, then enlisted in the Women's Auxiliary Army Corps, or the WWII as it was later designated. Was trained as a medical clerk, sent to England on a troop ship that required some 29 days to get from the East Coast to Southwest England, zigzagging all the way. She was moved to Normandy on D-Day +7.
she was on the move quite a bit, and during this time, she was cited with the Bronze Star and returned home with frostbitten feet in late November 1945. Brother Roy finished college in 1943 with a BA in accounting, joined the Navy in the V-5 pilot training program, received his wings with extra training as a dive bomber pilot. During a training flight, his prop control failed in the flat pitch mode. And of course, if you can't develop any traction with the airplane is not long to be there. His gunner was afraid to jump, and so when he rolled the airplane over and was looking in his rearview mirror, the kid didn't fall out, so he decided to land on a beach. The airplane ground looped, and in the force that exerted, transferred to the seat failed and broke at the hinge point and broke his back. So 18 months later, the Navy doing what they do, while still in the hospital, he was restored to flight duty and promptly discharged from the U.S. Navy as a lieutenant junior grade. Now, if you were 16 and the youngest, would you not try your damnedest to enlist, even as the war in Europe was grinding to an end? And you were soon to graduate from high school. There's no clear economic path to further your education. I was finally able to enlist at 17, went through electronic technician school, graduated, was sent to Pearl Harbor for assignment. Through the Rappel Depot or Report 3 assignment depot. And I'll get my page open. I did this to save time and not doing too well.
You're doing fine, you're doing great.
While in Pearl Harbor, I learned to plant palm trees around the base while waiting for assignment. And that was probably an invaluable skill for later civilian life, but I didn't understand it at the time. My assignment finally came through, and I was assigned to a radio station located underground in the hills of an island, which had a requisition for a teletype specialist. Now, in my electronic school, we did not study teletypes. When I arrived at the station, they had requested a Model 15 teletype specialist, and I'd never even seen one. Their disappointment knew no bounds. They did keep me, and there I finished my enlistment and returned to San Francisco in mid-1948. So I would like to say that for those of you that were not around during rationing and got tired of hearing when you complained about anything, the standard answer was, don't you know there's a war on? And those of us that are perhaps younger than that have not had to experience that thing. So I believe Byron's going to talk about another phase of our lives, collective lives in the service. Byron.
Thank you.
Well, my folks moved to Oklahoma City, and of course I went with them in 1949. There was a Naval Reserve building there, and it always looked interesting. So I said, I want to join the Naval Reserve. No, you can't get in the military. You just go off and get yourself killed, you know, and that sort of thing. So anyhow, eventually I joined the Naval Reserve in 1949, and attended the weekly meetings, and we had to go to boot camp for 2-week training before we could take a cruise. So I went to San Diego, California for a 2-week boot camp. It was very intense training, and they assured us we wouldn't have to go to boot camp again if we were ever called up. And incidentally, when we first went into the reserves, they gave us all the shots. You didn't have any choice. I mean, you signed a waiver that your heart, soul, and body belonged to the government. So anyhow, I went to the next summer. I signed up for a cruise, and I'd never been anywhere except Oklahoma and Kansas. And we rode a train from Dallas to New Orleans, and there were 3 ships that took us on a cruise, went to Havana, Cuba. And one of the ships, the one I was on, claimed that they had depth charged a German sub off the shores of South Louisiana, but they never could find the submarine until just in the past year or so, one of the geophysical ships looking for oil found it, and the theory was that they did depth charge the sub, and with the depth charge, it was set to go off at a certain depth, and the submarine was more shallow than that, and then it didn't go off until they were several hundred miles away and decided to submerge deeper, and the thing went off and sunk to the bottom, and it was confirmed that finally, after many, many years, the ship had sunk a German sub. So, got back from Cuba, and we didn't have any laundry facilities on the ship, and we only had about 2 changes of clothing, so you can imagine it was, we did smell a bit. Anyhow, in the next meeting I went to, they said, you boys go home and tell your mothers you're going to volunteer for active duty, because if you don't, we're going to get you anyhow. So I went home. I was scared to tell the folks. And finally, Dad and I were out in the yard. I said, Dad, you know, they put the heat on us to volunteer, and I think I will. He said, well, I think that'd be a wonderful idea. Go ahead and get your military service and come back out and go to college. So they gave me a round of shots there and they'd given me a round of shots before I went to Cuba. And so they gave me a round of shots before I went on active duty, and said, now you won't have to take these shots again, and you won't have to go to boot camp again. And I got my orders, and it was the Great Lakes Naval Training Center, which is boot camp. And so go to boot camp for 11 long weeks, and they gave us shots once a week, one shot per week. They wanted to make it as miserable as possible. From there, I went to Jacksonville, Florida. They interviewed us at the end of boot camp, and, you know, depending on your standing in the class, they decided kind of where you would fit. I was striking to be a diesel engineman, and they said, oh, no, you don't want to do that. You want to be in aviation. So, yeah, okay. So they sent me to A school, which is to familiarize you with naval aviation. And then I went from there to B school to be an aviation metalsmith. We worked on everything from sewing fabric to riveting aluminum to welding and so on and so forth. And from there, depending on your standing in class, you had a choice of where you could go. And here's a little base in Corpus Christi called Cabinets Field. There's advanced carrier training, but with no aircraft carrier involved. The newly minted pilots that came from out of Florida got their advanced training there of instrumentation and night flying and gunnery practice and landing on short runways and all that. So I went there and we had a bunch of different planes. All of them had propellers on them in those days. And mainly the planes I ended up working over, F-6F, Hellcats, and Patrol Bomber Medium. And PBM was the one that George Bush went down in. The F-6F was the first fighter plane that actually turned the odds in favor of Americans in a dogfight with the Japanese. The kill ratio went from more American planes down per Jap plane than to 10 to 1 Jap planes for one Hellcat that went down. And we had three of the Curtiss Helldivers there that James was talking about, and we worked on those. They had engines on them that had like 28 cylinders, so that meant that they had 56 spark plugs. Well, the mechanics did change the spark plugs. And the work I did on the Hellcats was mostly hydraulics. Everything on there was run by hydraulics or just power, arm power. So I finished up. I was there in Corpus for about a year and a half, and I read the newspaper one day, and there's a little blurb in there and said, Eisenhower says the reserves can get out early. So I went to the main building there and said, hey, I can get out of the Navy. What makes you think so? Well, I read about it. I'll go back and go to work. Where did you hear all this? Well, I read it in the paper. Oh, no. It's not. You'll be here for the duration. So I went back, went to work for another 3 days, and they called me and said, hey, you can get out. We don't know how to muster anybody out. I was the first one that mustered out of that base since the end of the Second World War. And it took several days. You had to check out to the library, make sure you didn't owe any overdue for overdue that sort of thing. It was audited and all that. Then they paid me my mustering out pay, which is about $400 or $500, and I got out and went to town. My wife had the old Pontiac loaded with everything we owned, and went back to Oklahoma. And the neighbor talked me into getting into engineering. He said that's a coming thing. So I ended up going to Oklahoma. If I've got anything to be proud of, and I'm proud that I was in the Navy, it was the fact, and very grateful for, incidentally, that the government paid us a stipend to go to college. And if you were married, if you were single, you got $110 or something like that. If you were married, you got $135. If you had a child, you got $160 per month. My wife had worked for 2 banks, and she knew how to work the float. And we knew when the check was coming in, and we would go to the grocery store and buy groceries to make it through the weekend, the last weekend of the month. And the check would always be there. We were able to beat the hot check to the bank. I also am proud of the fact that I, as a veteran, with honorable discharge, I could be buried at the DFW Veterans Memorial Cemetery, where my wife's ashes now rest, awaiting me to join her.
I'll have to admit to you all, excuse me, I'm the youngster of the trio here, and I'm 86.
Wow.
I'm gonna read some and ad-lib some, if you don't mind. So why is it to be thankful for the strong military that many veterans have provided for us over the many years? I am grateful for a strong military, for without it, we might be speaking German, might be speaking Russian, and who knows, China might be in there. Or we maybe have the privilege not to hold this meeting today, if not for the strong military. How many people who know the expression Cold War? Wow, an educated audience. Right after World War II, a term developed called the Cold War that explained the relationship between the Soviet Union and the U.S. The Soviets didn't want the U.S. to have anything to do with Europe. In the meantime, the Americans didn't want the Russians to have anything to do with Europe. So, developed a stalemate. That lasted, believe it or not, 44 years, the Cold War. A lot of tight situations developed during that time, but fortunately, one or both sides backed off and we didn't have actual war. Anybody think any situations that happened between the Soviets and the U.S.?
Cuba.
What?
Cuban Missile Crisis.
The Cuban Missile Crisis?
Yeah, 1961.
Had Powers flying over and you two got shot down?
Yeah, Gary Powers.
Powers.
And,
Maryland.
result of the conflict, that's what developed the NATO over there and some other treaties, but also Russia after World War II just kind of gobbled up a bunch of countries over there and then that become the Soviet Union. Well, my small part in the Cold War took place from 1955 to 57, so I'm not involved with any shooting, we stayed peaceful. A little history here. I graduated from high school in 1953, and I was on track to put myself through college. I grew up along the Great Lakes, and the opportunity to work on the big freighters up and down the lakes was available. And the nice thing with that, you could get on, work for 3 or 4 months, get off, go to school. And my plan was to get on, build my bank account up, go to school, run out of money, get back on a boat, and back and forth. So I went to a year and a half of college, and I said, I ran out of money. And at that time, there was a draft. Anybody familiar with the draft? Now, you could get a deferment, but guess what? You had to pay the piper down the road. So I said to myself, okay, I'm single, CB about 21, 22 maybe, and I said, I'm gonna get this thing out of the way. So I went down the draft board and say, I'm volunteering, put my name top of the list. Guess what? I was drafted. In 55, went in the Army down in Fort Knox. The first meal was fantastic. I said, wow, this is all right. Then I determined it was some kind of holiday. So anyway, took basic infantry training out of Fort Leonard Wood, Missouri. And trust me, Fort Leonard Wood, Missouri is the only place in the world that all the hills go up. So about 8 weeks of infantry training, they said, we have an option. We're trying to build up 11th Airborne Division to go to Europe and relieve a division over there. They're coming back, they call it Gyro. So, you have the option, now think about this for a few minutes, you have the option of going to Korea, the war was over, but the conditions were horrible there, or you could join the airborne, go to Germany, jump out of airplanes, and get an extra $55 on top of your 78. Now, how long did it take you to make that decision? So anyway, I signed up, and I took airborne training down in Fort Campbell, Kentucky, and that was a real treat. It was 3 weeks long, 2 weeks of intensive intense flight training, and last week is jumping several times, 5 times. But the funny thing is, they had cables lined up, and that's where you lined up for your cable, and for your fallout, whatnot. And the first day we lined up, and the cadre sergeant said, I got one, I got one. Guess what he's got? Somebody went home between training and airborne school and got an airborne tattoo. You think you're airborne, huh? Well, give me 20. And that poor kid was in a push-up position for 2 weeks. So the last week of the jump, you take 4-day jumps and 1 night jump. One jump we made, somebody on the ground had a sense of humor. Jumpers in the air, please return to the airplanes. How in the world did I do that? Jump school was a real treat. It was hot, and then taking the water break, they had 2 trailers there, carried water, and each had about 6 pickets. So, mad rush over there, and there's 2 or 3 chaplains say, hey, boys, let's back off and do this right. Right. Next break, they were right in there fighting and trying to find a spigot. So, anyway, school went well. Then we were going to Germany, and the division was going over in December of 1956. We arrive in Germany. Protocol says you have to demonstrate that you're battle ready within 2 weeks. So within 2 weeks, we go out to the field, and we weren't battle ready. It was probably about the coldest winter in Germany for years, and we about froze to death. I had a pair of boots that had an insole, it was rubber boots, had an insole and 2 wool socks, and my socks froze to my insole. Well, I survived. So anyway, I spent a year and a half in Germany. It was just fantastic. I got to go to Oktoberfest, almost caught it at World Olympics. In the meantime, we spent a lot of time in the field. The nice thing was, normally when maneuvers, they have you dig foxholes. Well, in Germany, you were in the forest that they treated like a parlor. They have forestmeisters, so if you break a tree off, the government guy give them the money with that tree fully grown. So we didn't fix up foxholes, so it made the training a lot easier. So anyway, I got out in 57 and continued on my journey to school. So my small part was I was in the airborne infantry and got to be a machine gunner. Now, that thing weighs 30 pounds. Every time you go somewhere, you got to carry the thing. So I had a helper there. It worked out pretty good. So what was our mission over there as infantry division? The thinking was that if the Russian, Soviet Union, decide to take over West Germany and invade, we were to go out and engage them and slow them down, put up a defense line, and then pick up and move back. Engage them again, then move back. Now, what's behind us? The Atlantic Ocean. So, the question we raised, what happens when we get to the ocean? We'll worry about that if it ever happens when we get there. So, fortunately, it never happened. So I would like to give a big thanks to all the veterans who made the Cold War extinct in 1966, I think it was, in 1991. And what happened at that time, the Soviet Union, with all their little countries, was in hard economic times, and they started losing countries. They started pulling away from the Soviet Union. That was the crash of the Soviet Union and became Russia, and the Cold War ceased at that time. It didn't last very long, so we're still fighting. But my experience in the military was rather good and interesting. It's an occasion where you put together a lot of people you wouldn't be otherwise, and you actually develop a lot of teamship. Sponsored, partnered with friends. So, anybody have any questions?
Thank you so much, John.
I think I can speak on the entire club, we appreciate all of your service, but we especially appreciate those three giving their take on their military service. So those are stories that you just don't hardly hear anymore. So thank you, gentlemen. We appreciate you so much.
Thank you. And Dwayne, the program.
All right, and continuing with our theme for Veterans Day and veterans, we have a program with Mary Walker Clark from Harris, Texas today to talk about her father and the journey there. I'll let her take over. Mary, welcome.
I'm really honored to be here on Veterans Day, and I love hearing other veterans' stories. 5 years ago, on this day, I arrived in Guwahati, India, to visit and to follow my father's World War II footsteps. He was posted in Misamari, India, and he was a pilot. And he flew cargo planes from Misamari over the Himalaya Mountains into Kunming, China. This was not a long distance, 500 miles. On a good day, the flight would take 4 hours. But the problem was in between Misamari, India, and Kunming, China, there were these mountains, the Himalayan mountains, the highest mountains in the world. That was a challenge already, but then there was this additional problem, and it was the weather. These really cold fronts would come barreling down, actually, from the Gobi Desert over the Himalaya mountains, picking up snow and ice as they went, and they would hit these warm water movements of air from the Bay of Bengal. And when they would crash together over the mountains, there were these enormous clouds and wind shears. They could throw a plane up 4,000 miles in 4,000 feet in a minute and back down again. These were fairly primitive planes. He was checked out on a C-46 and C-47. I can assure you, before I started all of this, I didn't know what that meant. But they were planes, particularly the C-46 that was developed for this, for flying over the Himalayas. What they were transporting was gasoline. And that's a pretty inflammatory cargo. And so you're going over the Himalayas, high up in the air. You hit these storms, and it can cause icing on the wings. And these planes literally just had kind of windshield wipers that would flip the ice off. That's all they had. And if they started getting too heavy with the ice, they would have to go down, but below them were the mountains. And so it was very dangerous flying. That route was called the Aluminum Trail because so many planes went down. Over 600 did. And 1,200 to 1,500, we aren't really sure of the number, crew members died. And another 1,200, though, were able to bail out and make their way back. But, so my father, well, let me back up just a step. They were taking gasoline to the American Army and to the Chinese Army in China. Here was the deal. Japan had taken over Hong Kong, and then down to Vietnam, then to Cambodia, and Thailand, Siam, and Burma at the time. So what originally transport all this, the items that needed to be transported, came up the Burma trail there. And that got knocked out because of the Japanese taking over Burma. The only way they could get supplies into the American Army and the Chinese Army were over the mountains. And that gasoline was needed to keep Japan engaged. Washington really, really wanted to keep Japan fighting on two fronts. They knew they were going to have to deal with them in the Pacific, but if they could split some of their forces and keep them fighting in China on their western front, then that helped the fighting in the Pacific. So they wanted to keep that going, but they needed supplies, and the hundreds, really thousands of pilots like my father made that happen. Now, sometime in 1945, I'm guessing it was August, and I need to say my father's war records were burned a few years ago in a fire in Kansas City. If your last name began with a T through W, those records were burned. And my father never talked about his experiences, and I don't think that was unusual at the time. I did know he'd flown the hump. I did know that that was respected, and I did know it was dangerous, but I knew very little other than that. But sometime in 1945, my father was going to make his last trip over to Kunming and back. He gets into his plane, and he never knew who his co-pilot was going to be. This was not a band of brothers operation. You really never knew who you were going to be flying with next. And climbing into that co-pilot's position was a man by the name of Mont Jennings. They start talking. Mont Jennings is from Lubbock, Texas. My father is from Plainview, Texas, 45 miles apart in the Texas Panhandle. And here they are meeting on the other side of the world. They visit with each other, discover that, enjoyed a pretty easy ride over to Kunming that day. My dad flew over, Mont Jennings flew back. And my father came back to Plainview to farm. He'd grown up on a farm and he continued to farm. Now, I would never have known that story. That story would have completely disappeared. But 55 years later, my aunt, my father's, I need to say one other thing. My father died in 1966 when I was 16. And again, he never talked about his war experiences. But his sister met, by chance, Mont Jennings in Lubbock, and they start talking. And to my eternal gratitude, my aunt had the wherewithal to interview Mont Jennings. And so it was on this little tape, and she came up to me at a family reunion and said, "I've met a man. His name is Mont Jennings. He flew with your father during World War II. I've interviewed him, and here's his story." So I took it home. I am an attorney. I practiced law in Paris for quite a few years. So I just popped that thing into my little tape recorder machine and listened. And for the first time ever, I knew where my father was posted. I found out about the very basic living conditions that he endured, the rain and mildew that was rampant in that area. It's a very wet area of India. I found out where he had flown. I found out the flying conditions. And I knew then that I was going to follow his steps. I wanted to see what he had seen, and I wanted to go where he had gone. And part of it was because I lost him at such an early age. I was 16. But I was still practicing law. My husband was busy. We had kids. I had to push that off. But I convinced my older brother and his wife and my husband, and we finally went 5 years ago. And we landed in Kuwait, India, in the Assam Valley on Veterans Day. Not planned, but on Veterans Day. And then we pursued that route. We had a wonderful guide who had the Misamari Air Base is still there. It is one of the few air bases still up in the Assam Valley. Now, I know I need a map, but if you will envision India as kind of this parallelogram, tilted a little bit, up in the far northeast end of it, there's a little pathway of land attached to what looks like an appendix. And it's right above what is now Bangladesh. That's the Assam Valley. It has a huge river, the Brahmaputra River, that goes through there. And it had 13 bases in World War II. And I know Misamari is still there, and a couple of the others are still there, but most of them had been closed. They were just built out of rice fields. So I did discover that India was pretty indifferent to the fact that we had come all the way around the world to trace our father's World War II footsteps, but we still got to go there. There were a lot of things that I think are still going on in that area that my father would have seen. Elephants still lift cargo and still help move things there in India. In World War II, they were one of the major ways that those 55-gallon barrels of gasoline were loaded into the planes. So they're still growing rice in a primitive way. There's lots of tea, in fact, if you drink tea at all, I can promise you that you have drunk Assam tea, the black tea of India. But it was still a wonderful experience to get to see where he had been. But we wanted to also go to Kunming, where he flew into. Now, our reception in Kunming was entirely different. India fought in World War II because the British made them. China fought in World War II because they were fighting for their country. And they revere, in Kunming, the Flying Tigers and the Hump Pilots. They know that story. They know that we saved them there. We are well respected. There is a restaurant called the Flying Tigers that's in the home of General Chenault, who, was born just down the road. And it was very strange being there, because we went to a museum also that had a huge section for the Flying Tigers and a pretty good section for the Hump Pilots. And in the section about the Flying Tigers, I'm watching this video, and they're talking about General Chenault having been born in Commerce, Texas. I mean, I'm on the other side of the world hearing about Commerce, Texas. And there's also a restaurant called The Hump, and we went there, met the owner. He said, "You are always welcome here. You and your children and your grandchildren are always welcome here." And there is a monument in Kunming to the Hump Pilots. It's a beautiful monument. It was such a moving experience to be there and see. We even got to go to the airport where he'd flown into, that's being torn up now to be built, other things to be built there, but we just got to go out on that runway just for a bit. So I was able to see where he was and what he had experienced to some degree. I come back from that, and I had begun doing some travel writing after I retired from law, and I wanted to write about that experience. But then I realized I wanted to know more about flying the hump, and I needed to know more about my father. So I started digging in, read as much as I could find on flying the hump, and to be honest, there's not a lot. It's not a particularly, now I know probably the older ones here, which maybe most of us know about flying the hump, but it's not a well-known operation for World War II. There are good books, but there's just not a lot of them. I also started talking to aunts, uncles, cousins, friends, to see what they remembered about my father. I started researching family history to kind of find out more about my father's early life. Because he came back to farm, he married, had 5 kids, but he always had a plane. We always had a plane. He started out small, but he finally ended up with a Bonanza 6-seater, and all 7 of us would pile in and fly to wherever we wanted to go. He loved flying. And so I ended up writing a much broader book about, it's part memoir, my experience growing up in the panhandle of Texas and with my father, part my father's story of being kind of a pioneer out there. His family was a pioneer farming family out there. His World War II story intertwined with that. And then a story about my brothers and how we never talked about my father after he died. Now that is really hard to believe, I know, but it was a time of silent grief. You just moved on. We had the funeral on Friday, and we were in school on Monday, and the door kind of shut. So we had to do some exploration of that, and we really ended up sharing so many wonderful experiences. And then the last part of the book is the trip that I described in the first part. And even after coming back from that, I had some wonderful experiences. I found two hump pilots that were still living. One was in Dallas, which was great. I went over there, met him at North Park Mall at a restaurant there, and we huddled over his pictures and his memories and talked. And the other one, I know this is a stretch, but the other one was in Australia. And it's the story of how I found him is in the book, but I did meet him and got his story. And he said, Australia, yeah, we flew the hump, but it was such a dangerous flying that they asked us if we wanted to fly it. They didn't tell us. But he was young, he was unmarried, and he decided to do that. He said it was the most dangerous thing he'd ever done, and he ended up being a professional pilot. So those stories are in my book. It was a very personal journey, but there were 2 coincidences that launched that book. One was in 1945 when Mont Jennings climbed into that cockpit, and the other was 55 years later when my aunt met Mont Jennings in Lubbock. Those 2 coincidental meetings launched 2 journeys for me. One was a physical journey to go to India and China. The second, though, was an emotional journey to finally know my father as much as I could, considering the time that it expired. So that is the story I tell. I'm proud that I've been able to do that and have had quite a few responses to that. A lot of them going, I've never heard of the hump, that was amazing. I love the flying part, I love the adventure travel, and just the reconnecting. I've been surprised how many people lost parents at an early age in that era, and they never talked about them. So it has encouraged, I know, some family discussions. So, any questions about that? I can go into all kinds of details about the hump if you really want to hear it. And the difference in a C-46 and a C-47 and a C-45 and a B-29, and I know all of that now. I like to spout it. But,
Do you have your book here?
Oh, I just happen to have my book here. So, no questions?
I'll let you take mine and her picture.
All right, well, thanks for having me.
Rotary are people of action, and we believe anybody that comes and speaks next to us as a program speaker and not only goes to the hump and goes and walks in their dad's footsteps, you are no doubt a people of action and here is your band.
Thank you
And
very
can we
much.
get a picture?
By the way, I'm a Paul Harris fan.
Oh!
As my dad was a Rotarian, sorry.
You were a visiting Rotarian, are you a Rotarian now?
I am not now, no.
We can help you join the Harris Club. I think they still have one over there.
They do.
Well, thank you to our club. Byron, Dawn, can y'all come up here? I didn't get y'all's picture real quick. Can I get y'all's picture real quick? And then we're gonna do the congratulatory. You guys, I appreciate y'all sticking around here. We had a lot on the plate today, so y'all come up here and let's get our pictures.